Good evening, everybody. I'd like to welcome you all to this evening's meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee. I'd like to remind everybody that this meeting is being live streamed and recorded for future publication on the Council's website. Can I please ask that everybody turns off their mobile phone or places it on silent for the duration of this meeting? Moving forward to item number 2, apologies. Councillor Watkins.
Yeah, apologies from Councillor Neil Phillips, and I'll be subbing for him.
I've not been made aware of any other apologies. Councillor Kenham.
I just make apologies for Councillor Beetham, who may just be running slightly late, but he may not be able to attend. Thank you.
That can be noted. If there are no more apologies, can I call upon members of the committee who were at the last Audit and Standards meeting, if they're happy for me to sign the minutes? Item 4, declarations of interest. Does any member have any interests which are not included on the schedule as per page 10 of the agenda? Item number 5, public consultation. I've not been made aware of any public speakers, so we shall move straight on to item number 6 and item number 7. I'm going to ask Vicky if she would introduce those as a block item.
Thank you, Chair. Items 6 and 7, the annual report and the charter, audit charter, need to be deferred until September's committee. The reports themselves should be presented and signed off by a suitably qualified officer, and unfortunately we've not had an officer in post. The interim head of internal audit started yesterday. She's currently reviewing the reports, but she's not had the time to determine whether they're adequate. The assurance, especially in the annual report, is key for the Council's governance as part of the governance arrangements of the Council, so due care needs to be taken with it. An updated set of reports, as I say, will come in September, and I can take questions on the reason for the deferral, but not on the actual reports themselves. But Ellen will present those reports when they come in September.
Is the committee happy if I propose that we refer these 2 reports till September? Does that receive a seconder? Councillor Shepherd?
Before you move to deferment, Chair, obviously I've gone through the document, so I just want to make just a couple of points I think might help in terms of I'm going away to sign the document. There's a lot of recommendations in this assurance plan, but I don't see any action plan as how we're going to address the recommendations. So I'd like to think when it comes back in September that there is an action plan attached as well, so we know the direction of travel, because we don't know, there's things in there in terms of, we know we've not identified any cemetery land, there's things on community centres, so it's them sorts of things that, you know, some of them have got 8 recommendations, some have got 4, some have got 10, so I think an action plan for this committee to see how we're going to move with the recommendations would be helpful, Chair, before you defer it.
Glad to come back in on that.
Thank you, Councillor Shepherd. I will speak to Ellen after this committee. We'll have a discussion around what needs to happen next and how the future reports will be presented. And obviously I'll get her to take that on board.
Did I get a seconder for that to deferral? Councillor Kenham? Can we take a vote on that? Is the committee happy to defer these 2 items till September? Any against? Any abstentions? Moving to item 8, which is the work programme. If I can ask Director Richardson to introduce this.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is the work programme for this committee for the ensuing municipal year. Obviously, at this stage, it is just a very generic, general work programme. There will be, I have no doubt, additions to that. If you recall last year, this committee sought additional reports, so obviously this is an opportunity to amend the programme to incorporate those. We will review the programme as we go along in any event, but it is an opportunity for members to do that. The only thing I would flag, Chair, is the point that you've just made on that those last two items, that obviously the first and third items will need to be moved across to the 6th of September meeting. So you'll need to acknowledge that as part of the approval process for this. But apart from that, it's really open to the committee to determine whether it wishes to add anything to the programme, leave the programme as it is, move things around. It's really one for you now to consider and debate, Chair.
Does anybody have any comments they wish to make? Councillor Kenner.
I'm happy to propose the work programme, Chair, with the recommendations to defer to September, as Director Richardson just outlined.
You happy to second that, Councillor Tromans?
I'd like to second that, but also add in the
Councillor Kenyon.
Thank you, Chair. Just one last Director Richardson, is that, just so I can accept the amendment, is that viable, that with the officer's time, is that something that we can bring into the work programme? Was it September, sorry? Whenever it's available. So I just wanted to ask the point.
It is, Chair. That's absolutely fine. The only caveat to that is it would depend when in the cycle you would like it. But if you're happy to delegate that to either Vicky or myself, I think it would be one for the head of internal audit to determine when would be a good time to do that, and therefore if we can leave it for Ellen to suggest a date, and then we can amend the programme accordingly if that's acceptable to the committee.
Councillor Tromans.
in that case, if we just, as normal wording is, leave it to the chair to agree with officers, the timing of that would be perfect. Yeah. But we normally look at to answer Jack's point, we normally do review the risk register, and it would certainly be something we'd want to do again this year. Thank you.
So that will be then delegated through the head of finance and enterprise, through myself, and we'll work a date out to stick that into the agenda and the work programme. So can we move to the vote then on the recommendation from Councillor Richardson that Director Richardson, that the work programme be approved with those amendments? That's carried. Item number 9, which is any other items. I'm going to ask Vicky to introduce our auditors to us and their report this evening.
Thank you, Chair. So the audit team from Grant Thornton are here to present the update to the 2021 accounts and where we are at this point in time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chair. For members, my name is Grant Patterson. I'm the engagement lead for the external audit for 2021. Just before I start, I think just a comment on the risk register. I think probably as external auditors, our experience is not unusual for the audit committee to look at risk management arrangements rather than the risk register. And I think internal audit here in the past have bought an annual review of the risk management strategy. So that's probably what we normally see around an audit committee in its role, is looking at the overall risk management strategy, and the risk register is part of that. So I'll just throw that in there from our experience. It might be something you want to consider around what that report actually covers, rather than we have a normal debate around audit committees and looking at the risk register, if you know what I mean, because that it's not necessarily your role, I suppose, in a way to look at specific risks. It's to understand how they get there and that they're being managed. But I just throw that out there as a general observation. So, okay. The main reason we're here today, and apologies for the late tabling of that, is we're here with an audit progress report in terms of the 2021 audit. We have been working sort of closely with the finance team. Our original plan was to hopefully bring the audit findings report to this committee. But I'll let Will take you through the detail of that. We're not quite there yet. We've been working closely with the new Director of Finance to ensure that the final bits of the audit get done. We are getting closer, but we're just not quite there yet. And I think we do recognise it's a relatively small finance team. Director of Finance is actually helping out directly with some of the queries now, but I reckon trying to balance that with the strategic role that you'd expect the Director of Finance to do as well. Sort of finalising the outturn, etc. So we are trying to work with the council around that. We are having some high-level conversations about whether we might be able to get it done for early August, but if not, as noticed on the work plan, I would say the default would be we will get this done for early September. But as an audit team, we're looking to get the work completed ahead of that. What I'll probably do now is hand over to Will, because I know you haven't, I suspect not all of you have had a chance to go through the report, so we'll go through it in a little bit more detail around where the areas we're still working on. And then after that, we're happy to take questions. And in terms of the update report, there are some elements at the back that we'll mention into, which is sort of maybe some good practice. We haven't seen you for a few months, so some of it might be a little bit old, but we'll just take you through that as well. Okay, so I'll hand over to Will.
Thank you. So I'd first of all like to draw your attention to page 6. So this is the progress and where we're at the moment. So in January is when we last reported to you where we were at on the audit, and we were hoping to have the audit concluded in March. Now, unfortunately, that didn't happen, and that's due to sort of budget setting getting in the way, and then challenges of the sort of previous head of financial services and the information they were trying to get to us. So we'd been flagging to the committee previously that there was a key person risk around the head of financial services, in that they had so many roles and responsibilities that they weren't distributed evenly through the finance team, and so there were gaps in knowledge forming, and that has now come into place when the head of finance left in March. The queries that are still outstanding and the evidence that we receive, the finance team are struggling to find that evidence for us and find that information. I think part of that is because the previous head of finance knew so much about it and was so in the detail that the training perhaps wasn't distributed to the rest of the finance team, but that was in progress, and it was hoping that it would happen before the head of finance left, but unfortunately it didn't. So we're now in a position where there are several outstanding items, and they are set out on page 7. As discussed, or as Grant mentioned, we're hoping that we will be able to either issue an AFR in early August, or at least get to a stage where the work is substantially complete in early August. The other thing I just want to mention here, so the statutory deadline for the 2021 financial statements was the 30th of November 2021. Now, because of the delays on that audit, the 21-22 financial statements and the audit of those financial statements, the deadline for that is expected to be approved and will be the 30th of November 2022. But because of the delays on 2021, the 21-22 financial statements, production and audit of those is also likely to miss that deadline now, because there just isn't enough time to get there. So we've got to take you on to page 7. So say this is a list of all of the outstanding items, and it's graded sort of red is a high risk of material error, amber is as a possible risk of material error, and then green is as a low risk. Now, the two key items on here, and the sort of the two main reasons why we couldn't bring an AFR to this committee. First of all, we have a query on the Ppe Revaluations. Now, they're a significant risk for us, and the item that's outstanding on that is a query on Gresham Road. Now, it's to do with the valuation of Gresham Road, but more to do with how that was accounted for. So we're currently discussing with officers to identify exactly where in the financial statements the movement in revaluation is. So that's one part. And then the second sort of area that is a significant risk for us is on journals. So when we did our journal sample, we had a large sample, it was about 66, and last Friday we were down to about 33. So we're still waiting for evidence for 33 as of last Friday, but I know that Vicky and the team have been working hard to get that back to us. I think that number has dropped now, but we still need to go through that information and get to a point where we're happy with the journals. Now, the other things that are in there in the sort of orange section, they're generally smaller items, such as queries on samples, maybe 1 or 2 queries here and there, but cumulatively, because there is so many, there is a chance that there could be an error found in there and a misstatement in those items. But again, I know the finance team are working hard. It's just tricky to locate that evidence or the working papers behind it, because the head of finance perhaps dealt with them at the time. So I'd now like to move you on to page 8. So page 8 sets out the audit adjustments that we've identified so far. So there's 2 adjustments. First of all is Pingle Stadium. So this is again a Ppe Revaluations item. So the valuer had incorrectly calculated the valuation here. I think essentially there were 3 columns that they needed to add up, and they just added up and just given us 1 column as the value. So that meant that the PPE balance on the balance sheet is understated by 713,000. Now that has been adjusted in the revised financial statements. And secondly, there was updated guidance that came out around the business rates appeals provision. And on the change of that guidance, the council have removed £710,000 from the business rates appeals provision. So this does have an impact on the surplus or deficit on the provision of services by the same amount of 710k. We've also identified some disclosure issues, so these are just spelling mistakes or little numbers didn't tie up here and there, and they've been corrected as well. But as we said on page 7, that list of outstanding items, there is a chance that there may well be more misstatements that will be reported in there when we bring our audit findings report to you in either August or September, whenever that falls. So the next one is page 9. So page 9 talks through value for money. So on top of the financial statements audit, we have to give a value for money conclusion. Now the code allows for 3 months after the date of the opinion for that. So that will, once we've done the opinion, we then have 3 months, and that is looking to be November 2022 when we will bring the auditor's annual report to the committee. So the summarised timetable is on page 10, and that sets out, as we've said, that we're hoping early August is when we'll have an AFR, and November will be the auditor's annual report. So page 11 onwards is then a sector update, and there's a couple of reports that will probably be helpful to the committee, and they're set out on pages 14 to 17. So those reports are from SIPFA and the NAO, but they go through things such as the value of internal audit, good practice in annual reporting, and there's an effectiveness tool for the committee. So those few reports might just be of interest to members. But thank you.
I'm going to log off and just say brigade.
Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions for Will. One of them is, what's the story with Gresham Road, and what financial impact will that have on the bottom line? And the second thing, which you might want to address first, is... Okay, sorry. 2 questions for Will. First of all, what's the story with Gresham Road, and what impact will that have on our bottom line as a council? And the second one, which you might find simpler and can answer first, is just in respect of the Pingle, the Harriers, the Pingles running track and all the rest of it. You said it was undervalued, and actually, so by 710, so it's actually 1.413 million we should have had in there, rather than the 700 and whatever it was, 1,000. Is that correct?
So I'll start with Pingles. If I'm honest, I can't remember off the top of my head what the value of Pingles is now, but essentially there was 710k to be added to the value that's currently in the balance sheet. As I say, previously the valuer had just used 1 column of the spreadsheet and should have used essentially adding up the 3 columns together to give the value. So yeah, it's just increasing the value that's in the balance sheet by £710,000. In terms of Gresham Road, so the issue on Gresham Road, so the valuation in itself we agree with and we're happy with. We've tested it back to supporting evidence, and it's okay. Where the issue crops up is when you revalue an asset, depending on what has happened previously to that asset will depend where the movement goes. So in this case, the movement should have gone to the revaluation reserve. However, it's unclear at the moment whether it has all gone to the revaluation reserve or whether some of it has gone to the I&E. So we're trying to work out with officers where that movement has gone, and once we know where that movement has gone, we will know what the error is.
Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. So just so I'm clear, because I've got a horrible sinking feeling from what you were telling me there, it sounds like, although somebody has come up with a broadly correct revaluation of, i.e. the place is worth more now because of the work that was done to it by the council, some of the value of that uplift has been taken into general expenditure, or that money's gone somewhere other than just into the reserve. Sounds like what you're saying, which is a bit worrying, because that could materially mean that we've got a bigger deficit than we realised, or what?
So what happened was, so in 1920, the valuation went up to 1.7-ish million. In 2020-2021, the valuation dropped to 1.5 and a bit. So that movement between the 1.7 and the 1.5, some of it should have gone to the revaluation reserve, and some of it should have gone to the I&E. To bring the reserve to zero, so there should be no more reserve for Gresham Road, and then the rest of that charge will go to the I&E. Now, at the moment, we're unsure how that movement has worked. We don't know some of it has gone to the reserve. We can see that there's some in the reserve, but we just can't see that it's the right amount that's gone to the reserve. So there is a chance that there is too much in the reserve, and some will need to go to the I&E, but there's also a chance that there's too much in the I&E and some of it will need to go into the... We don't know, is the honest answer at the moment.
And if I can just finish this point, Chair, what impact would that have on the council? Would that leave us effectively, in layman's terms, for the residents that are watching this, would that leave us with a bill of any kind, with a gap in our budget of any kind?
The answer to that question is no. There are some overrides that kick in for local government in terms of what hits, I suppose, the bottom line that hits your budget. So, I mean, if we go, I suppose, simplistic terms, capital accounting is, if you've got an asset worth £1 million, if you revalue it, it goes up to £1.5 million. You take the £500,000 to what's called the revaluation reserve, effectively. If you then revalue it the next year, if it went down just to 1.25 million, what you say is, I need to revalue that. You take that out of the revaluation reserve. If it went below £1 million, if it went to 900,000, and you would take 500,000 out of the revaluation reserve, and then the 100,000 difference would then go into the income and expenditure statement. But then you get the statutory override to kick in that say, because you're a local council, local government body, you would reverse that back out again. So that's when you see all this stuff going through the MERS and the expenditure fund, that's sort of taking all that adjustment out. So when it comes to capital elements like that, no, there's no impact. Effectively, where the revenue impact comes in is either through depreciation and MRP, because your capital financing requirement and elements like that, that's what kicks in eventually, and then interest rates. But no, the actual capital movements will not impact council taxpayers of the council. But what it is actually saying, so to a certain extent, is you've understated the amount of assets you are actually managing. And I think as your auditor, we sort of encourage you to say you need to understand your asset base, you need to understand that. And I suppose also in making informed decision making, knowing how much your asset base is worth, and and how value for money is important. So it's more, I think, in the value for money stream around, do you managing your asset base properly in this instance? But it's always important to get the accounting right, because basically you're managing more assets, and I suppose in the way it's the wealth of the borough as overall in terms of the assets of the council. That's what you're managing. I don't know whether the Director of Finance has got anything to add to that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think from obviously what Grant is saying, ultimately in terms of the general fund balance, the bottom line balance of the general fund, it won't move because of a revaluation adjustment. It will just impact on unusable reserves generally is where that will be, and the balance sheet being at the right value. So I think that's, so in terms of the general fund itself, it shouldn't make any adjustment to that. Okay.
Does anybody else have any questions? Councillor Shepherd.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of the two statements in amber, So it says, receipt and review of evidence to support the samples of debits, credits and grants. And then the one underneath, receipt of working papers to support the values within the HRA notes. So could you give me a little bit, is it a case of you haven't had the paperwork to support what you want to do? We can't find it, or is it being miscalculated?
So at the moment, I think we've had some of the evidence back, and it's now queries on the evidence that we've then received for the one around grants. So we don't know if there's an error yet, I suppose, while the questions are still outstanding, but the nature of the queries, I don't think it's likely. And then in terms of the working papers to support the values within the HRA notes, I think we've tested the sort of main elements of the HRA through some of the other testing that we do. So there isn't an error there yet, and the working papers to tie up to the HRA notes is just essentially agreeing a working paper to the value that is on the financial statement. So there isn't an error there that we know to at the moment.
Does anybody else have any further questions? The recommendation is then that this committee note the report. Are we happy to note it? Carried.
If there's no dissent, Chair, you can take that as assent.
Yeah, that's carried. We'll note that report. I'd just like to confirm then that there's no need to remove the press and public from the committee, as item number 11 has actually been deferred till September. So that will now come before the committee in September. And therefore, can I ask for the live stream to be stopped, and I will call this meeting to a close.